Welcome to the Smallholding Revolution podcast, where we look at the journey from no house to buying farmland to building your own home and life on your very own smallholding. So, I'd like to introduce my podcast partners, compadres, pioneers.
Pioneers. That's the phrase.
This is Scotty, and this is David, and we are at various stages of our journey from nothing to smallholding. I'm at the nothing stage, looking to buy land and start that whole part of the journey. David's a little bit further along. He has bought land. And Scotty has been living on his farm for the last 10 years and is working on building a house with the weird and wonderful journey of planning permission.
Very weird and wonderful, yeah.
And we'll get to that in a bit. But I know there are so many of you who are at various stages of this journey, but I really wanted to support those who are at the very beginning. Can you buy land and build your own house in it?
Hell yeah!
Absolutely. And we're going to show you how.
Exactly.
I'm going to take you on our process.
Have to give you the caveat, it's not easy, it's not overnight, but it can be done. And we'd love to support you on your journey and invite you to join us on our journey as we do exactly what we're going to be talking about on this podcast over the next few weeks, months, years. There's lots of
decades.
Decades.
It's a lifetime journey, actually, isn't it? Really.
Exactly. And the original pioneer with this whole idea and this whole juggernaut journey of helping people to go from nothing to smallholding farm. It's you, David.
Oh, great. Hi, I'm Dave. Great to meet you all. So when we were discussing how we were going to set up this podcast and what we were going to cover, one of the first things that was mentioned was that it would be good to talk about the history of smallholding and how I in particular came to my idea of helping people to get back onto land, those who want to do that. And we were just discussing earlier on about the background to all of this. And I'm sure some of you probably know, but others might not know that for many years, obviously thousands of years, people particularly in the UK, and I'm talking from a UK perspective here, but I'm sure this applies to many parts of the world, but in the UK, most people lived on small holdings, little farmsteads, small communities, village communities. Only a small proportion of people lived in cities and urban areas. And then in the 1700s in the UK, Britain experienced, following the Enlightenment period, Britain experienced the first industrial revolution, as it's called, with the invention of things like the steam engine. The printing press was slightly earlier, but which was very useful for disseminating information, a bit like the modern internet today. But the steam engine, the looms, and all sorts of other fantastic inventions. And that resulted in a requirement for people to live in cities. Now, when I did history at school, we were taught that people flocked to the cities. They demanded to go and live in these cities, mainly in slums. And I always thought,
they didn't?
Well, I always thought it was quite strange. So on one hand, we were taught that people flocked to the cities, and then we were taught that the conditions in the cities were slum conditions. And yet, we've all been to lovely villages in the Cotswolds or Norfolk and Suffolk, and in fact, many people go and stay in Airbnbs in these very villages today, paying a lot of money to get the experience of staying in a beautiful countryside, bucolic village. So you think to yourself, well, why would they leave? And of course, what isn't as common...
Better chips. Better chips in London.
Probably. Manchester and Birmingham and Bolton and Oldham. But actually, what happened was there was a period of time where successive laws were passed, and these were called the Enclosures Acts in the 1700s. And prior to this, if you lived on the land, you would have access to the common lands, which were common grazing lands and common woodlands. So people living in villages, they'd have their own plots. They would work on the land, on the lord of the manor's lands, and they didn't have money as such, or what we would now class as money. In fact, banknotes only were formed in, I think, the 1600s. for the first time. Prior to that, real money was gold and silver. Anything else was just debt notes. There was no money as such other than real gold and silver. So these people would pay for their and get paid in terms of a tithe, either tithe barns in the church. They would put a portion of their own crops aside, and if they were working for the landlord, they could be paid in food and crops. But also they would have their own lands and access to the common lands. And the common lands, they would be able to get their wood for burning, their wood for making furniture, fences, that sort of thing,
so
houses.
Like feed their crops and have their
everything, animals grazing,
okay.
and it was all managed amongst the community.
Okay.
Then the Enclosures Act basically enclosed those areas off. And during that period, this is purely a theory. I mean, I haven't got any evidence for this. I wasn't around in the 1700s. But people were then in a position, if you imagine, you've now no longer got access to this free grazing, this free access to wood and coppice that you've been managing, your family's been managed for years.
So the government made it illegal for you to go on there and do what you need to do to gather wood and feed your animals and whatever. So,
and if you go to, there are a number of museums. There's a museum in Nottingham, and it's a museum, it's in the old Nottingham jail, and you can actually see some of the records for where people were arrested for stealing a rabbit, snaring a rabbit or a hare, and then transported to Australia for that crime. Same thing for being hungry. For being hungry and feeding themselves on an animal that lives wild anyway, which historically they would have always had access to. Yeah. So by enclosing these lands, you forced the so-called serfs, peasants, the equivalent of people like us, to effectively have no option but to move to somewhere where they could earn money, new money. And the great thing about that is ultimately that it's all, can be taxed and taken away from you. Okay. But these people then had no choice but to leave the land because the land couldn't sustain them anymore. Yeah. And of course...
Or what they had access to.
What they now had access to. Yeah. At the same time, in places like Norfolk, there was the Earls of Leicester were developing four-course rotation. So it's a farming system where you followed crops, legumes, and root crops. So cereal, legumes, root crops, and then fallow in a series to cycle it. So for that to work, they needed larger areas of land. So they had to enclose more areas and keep the serfs off. Yeah, and then of course the linen and wool trade, the wool trade in particular, meant that more lands were needed for sheep. So the sheep farmers, the big landowners, were then running sheep on lands which previously would have been used for grazing. Okay. So as a result of that, the lands were enclosed. The people had no option but to move to the towns and cities. Okay.
Or get a free holiday to Australia.
Free holiday to Australia.
Busting a rabbit.
That was followed up with the Highland clearances, even more sheep on the land. You can look at Google Maps and see all the deserted crofts, hundreds of thousands of them over Scotland, all now deserted as the big estates were amalgamated and the people were shipped off to the colonies. Yeah. Then it was followed up with the Irish famine, during which the British government and the landowners were exporting food out of Ireland whilst the people were starving. Yeah. It's a pretty sad state of affairs, really, but what it did result in is a large number of itinerant workers to dig the canals and, more importantly, the new railways. There were no JCBs, so they needed strong Irish navvies to come and dig those railway embankments and tunnels and things, and obviously continue populating the expanding empire. And that is really the historical background to what has inspired me to try and do my little bit to help reverse that. And reversing it under the current rules that we live in today.
But you're not allowed. Get off my land.
Get off my land, you're not allowed.
You're not allowed. The government says no.
But actually, the government doesn't say no. The rules do say that you can. Now, our programme isn't for people who want to build a McMansion and try and find a loophole to do that. It's not for that. It's for people
not building a moon base in the middle of a country.
We're trying to help people who genuinely and are inspired by the idea of living on the land, growing their own clean, chemical-free food. Or they can grow what you can do what you like when you've got your land, But we're inspired by the idea of food that is free of pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, biocides, industrial fertilizers. It is not necessary to use those to grow your own food. You can eat food that is unadulterated by poisons. The word that, well, let's think about it. The word sides, C-I-D-E-S.
Yeah.
It's Greek. You know, the etymology of that word is Greek. It means to kill or death. So farmers spray their wheat crops. They do a thing called terminating the wheat with a product called glyphosate. The biggest class action lawsuit in America was for cancers caused as a result of glyphosate.
Wow.
And the farmers use it to the farmers in Britain use it to terminate their wheat and barley crops to make it easier to harvest, so they get an extra maybe 5% yield.
They put glyphosate on it and then harvest it.
Yeah, it's a herbicide. Yes, it's a herbicide that is used to get rid of weeds, but they also use it to make it easier to harvest. So it dries out, it desiccates the wheat effectively, so it makes it easier to harvest. It makes it you gain about 5% yield.
It loses the moisture. I remember seeing on Clarkson's farm, they were waiting for the moisture to drop in the wheat before they could harvest it. So they spray it, they add it, yes. Now, the thing is, you then think to yourself, well, the argument is, it only has a life of 6 months, which is not true, by the way. It lasts a lot longer than that. But the fact is, that's fine if you're spraying it a year before when the weeds are coming up. But if you're spraying it just before harvest, well, it's going to go on the harvest, isn't it? Yeah. And if that harvest is then used for malting barley, for going into beer, all those people drinking beer are going to be possibly drinking, I don't know, needs to be checked out, verified, but it's...
Beer makes me go a bit funny when I drink it.
Yeah, well, there you go. It's not the alcohol, it's the glyphosate. Right. Anyway, that's enough waffling.
Let's backtrack just a little bit. How easy is it to buy land? Can I wake up today and see a bit of land, call the estate agent, decipher some of their inconsistencies and lies, and say, I'm going to put in an offer on this, can I buy this?
You can, in some circumstances,
So I just need to have the available capital to buy it.
Yeah, if you've got the money, a lot of farmland, most farmland is sold sort of between farmers.
Okay.
But land does come available, but normally it will be in areas, it will be agricultural land, so you can't just go and build on agricultural land. Okay. That's the key point. You can't buy a piece of 10 acres of farmland or 4 acres or an acre or whatever, or 100 acres and just build on it. Right. And this is where it gets complicated.
Okay, so I want to take baby steps on this.
Okay.
So I've seen the bit of land.
Yeah.
How do I buy the land? Do I just go and get a mortgage from Halifax?
Before we answer that, why are you talking about buying land and not buying a farmhouse with a couple of barns and 15 acres?
Okay, so my selfish reason is culturally, so I'm from East Africa. I was born and raised in Uganda until I was 6. And culturally, we as a family, we buy land and we build our own house and we raise our family in there. And I've just had this innate drive to always build my own house because I want it to flow a certain way. I want the garage in this place. I want the living room to look like this and lead into the kitchen and have that whole communal space. And just, this is what I have. I want
That's the vision.
To have a proper ensuite and a walk-in wardrobe. Like these are just key things that I like because all the houses that I've seen, I fit my life into them instead of the house fitting my life.
Yes.
So that's my...
That's your motivation.
Yeah, that's my thing.
And what other motivations do you think people might have in general?
I think it's getting to that freedom of being mortgage free, of being self-sustainable, to know that I can build a solar farm and run my own power and I don't need gas and just living completely self-sustainable. Yeah,
well I think one of the points you just raised there is mortgage free because on average, if you're looking at buying a homestead in the UK, not in the north of some Welsh mountain or in the North York moors, or in fact they'd probably be expensive there because of holiday homes, but you know, in a far-flung place, you're probably looking at spending or paying about £1 million, probably more. I don't know.
If it's residential already, that's the point.
Okay.
Yeah.
That if it's got a farmhouse already and the precedent is that you can live there, the price per acre is going to be large.
Yeah.
Okay.
80, 100,000 more. Whereas the price per acre for agricultural land is on average 10 to 12,000 pounds.
Unless you're a killer negotiator like yourself and got it for a lot less than that.
Wow.
And it amplifies depending on that agricultural land that you're looking at.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you can get it as low as 3,000 or 4,000, and it could be, if you only bought an acre and it's outside a major town, it might cost you 50 or 60,000 pounds just for an acre of agricultural land.
Yeah.
But on average, it's about 10 to 12,000 pounds. Interestingly enough, though, you would, in the UK, for people who are outside of the UK watching this, London is the most expensive part of the UK, and the area around London is extremely expensive for residential properties. So a house that in the Midlands might cost 500,000, in the same house, you know, a house on say an acre of land, if it was in the what we call the stockbroker belt in Surrey, or that's what they used to call it
Yeah,
in the olden days, isn't it?
Yeah.
That might be 2 or 3 million pounds.
Yeah.
Okay.
You know, the physical same size house on the same plot of land. And so one would imagine that agricultural land would follow the same, you know, be 4 or 5 times the price, or 6 times the price. But it's not true.
It's not.
Agricultural land might only be 20% more, 20 to 50% more outside London. So there is a big opportunity for people who want to live on a farmstead to be able to acquire something affordable in and around London, if they can navigate the process to actually convert the bare agricultural land to residential. And that's what our programme, the programme we're trying to prove.
That's what I saw
Yeah.
2012.
Yeah.
In 2012, I picked up that book, Field to Farm, by David Ackerman. Everybody's got to read that book, find it. I think the price of it is ridiculous now on Amazon. I think it's like 70 odd quid. I've passed my Field to Farm book up
We need to set
around.
the library, don't we?
Yeah.
You know, that people can borrow it.
I've passed that to anybody who's interested in reading it, basically. 2012, I read that book because I had the opportunity to move out of London and buy land. And I read that book and it showed me a way of acquiring agricultural land with the range David's saying, 5, 10, 15 grand an acre, around about that line, that's not residential at the moment, that is just agricultural land, no infrastructure. And it shows you a way to stay on that land whilst building your farm, building your home, and building the life that you've got. You know that vision that you were just went in? I want my bedroom here, I want the ensuite here, I want my communal space and everything along those lines. Hold on to that bad boy vision and read that book, because essentially that shows you how to the parameters of what you need to be able to do, which makes it affordable. Okay? If you wanted to buy farmland now with a farmhouse already on it, in the area that you're looking at, we know that it's going to be £1 million plus. Okay, so very inaccessible for a lot of the population.
Especially now that most people buy property through leverage, through mortgage finance. So most people don't have the money to buy. And right now, we are August 2024, the banks are pulling in their funding, despite the fact they'll say, oh, it's easy to get a mortgage. The reality is they're not lending at the moment at the rates that they normally do, because the financial system is on a bit of a knife edge. So you need to look at other ways, other sources of acquiring your land. Otherwise, it could be another decade or two for most people, even if they're working hard to save, even if they can save, you know, to do it. And if inflation continues, you'll always be chasing your tail. Your money will reduce, any savings you have will reduce in value by whatever the real inflation rate is, not the inflation rate we're told it is, 2%, which we all know is not true. That, you know, we know it's a lot higher than that.
So just wanted to touch on mortgages. So can you just get a standard mortgage to buy farmland?
No.
Does it work the same as buying a house? Because when I looked at it, the first thing that slapped me in the face was a deposit percentage that they typically request. And that varied wildly. That went from 35% up to 70%, which that's ludicrous. Like,
Well,
who's just got 500k sitting around in the bank?
But you're right. That's
ready to deploy.
Yeah, that's a really good point. The bank, if you think about it, it is ludicrous from our point of view, but we're not the ones lending the money. We're the ones borrowing.
Okay.
So it's not ludicrous from the lender's point of view. So when you get a mortgage, and I'll just be brief on this, but most people think, they imagine they go to the bank and the bank opens its vault and in there's a lot of money sitting there and you go, I need £100,000 or $500,000.
No, they're swimming in it.
Yeah, and they go into the vault
swimming in
and
the
they
money.
go and count.
Like DuckTales.
They go and count, they get the money out, flick it out.
Yeah.
And they go, there you go, there's your money. But have you ever noticed that no one ever gets the cash, do they? It always gets transferred to another account, the account of the person that you're buying the property from. Right. So the money doesn't actually exist. There is no money. The money only comes into creation when you sign the mortgage agreement. So you're creating a contract that actually creates the money. All money, well, pretty much all money that we have in our system, this is hard to get your head around if you've not thought about it before, is really an expression of debt. So effectively, the mortgage company are creating a security document, a document which you have agreed to pay them a set amount. So a really simple example is you borrow £100,000 and you say, I will pay that back over, I don't know, let's say 20 years, right? So what's that? £100,000 over 20 years, £5,000 a year. So you're basically making a promise to give them £5,000 a year. That then creates the money that they then lend into existence and give to the person you're buying the property from, because you've made a contract with the bank to give them £5,000 a year. So you've created value out of thin air, and they have the right.
Paid it to you, basically.
No, they've paid it to the other person, but they have the right to create that money out of thin air. It's probably a bit too much for this podcast at this stage, but you've asked a question about mortgages, which is so you understand why. Now, if you've never run a farm and you've never run a business and you go to a bank and say, I'd like to borrow some money, they're going to go, well, you're quite high risk. You don't know anything about farming. You've never owned land. You like the idea of it, don't we all? But how do I know you're going to succeed or fail? You might give up after a week going, oh, it's got a bit muddy. I don't like mud on my shoes. You know, farming in stilettos is not much fun, etc. So they're going to just say you're low risk. Now, if you had 30 years experience running a farm and you had a track record of successful, profitable business, then they would probably lend you 70%. If you had successful experience running a business for 15 years and had quite a bit of capital, then they would say, well, maybe we'll lend you 50% because you've got quite a bit of money to put down on this land and we're only at risk for 50%. Because remember, they are creating a loan. They're not giving you money, but they're creating a securitized document. If you fail to pay it back, then they will have to make good that balance. Right? That's when it comes a problem to them. But if you pay it back, it's not a problem because they're going to get the interest. And then when you've paid all the money back, they extinguish the loan that sits on their books. So they just cross off what the money they made out of thin air. But they've collected all the interest in the meantime. So they've created interest on something that never existed, which if you or I did it, it's called fraud. It's called counterfeiting, right? We would go to prison for it, but if you have a banking license, you're allowed to do it. So that's my opinion. Correct me if I'm wrong, YouTubers out there who know about finance. I'm just a bloke on the internet. I'm just a geezer on the internet.
So then going back to that high risk proposition. So you've woke up, you've seen the land that you want, and you want to go and buy it, right? You've got to be bloody bonkers to think that from no experience of being a farmer to be able to then read a book, Field to Farm, and know how to acquire that land and run a farm and run a successful business in the first 3 years. That's essentially what you need to do. That's the mission. You've got to be bloody bonkers. Are you bonkers? All right. So I was that bonkers, 10 years ago because of I read this book and I knew I could do it. All right. What my perception was I was a high risk because I'd never done farming before. And the statistics show you that a lot of businesses fail in the first year, it's, 90% plus. So what was I going to do? All right. So with the Field to Farm piece, it teaches you how to get on the land and live in a caravan, you stay in a caravan.
Caravan Act compliant building.
A Caravan Act compliant building, and I would figure it out. That was my bonkers plan. But I knew that I couldn't start and survive a farm business from scratch because I did not know how to do it.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
Then it was a roller coaster. It was an absolute mess.
That's episode 2 or 3.
Sign me up for a few more of those. I'll be crying on you. But the universe answered my prayers and put David in my path. He provides this farming and agricultural passion and love to then be the other part of this land investment piece that I wanted. I wanted freedom. I wanted to invest in land. I wanted to get the planning gain from taking a cheap piece of agricultural land, getting planning permission on it, building the house of my dreams and living on there with my beautiful wife and my kids. That's what I wanted, personally. I wanted that freedom. I wanted my family. I wanted to have fun. Because I'm bonkers. But I didn't have that other part. And the universe answered with this beautiful human being.
We had a mutual friend, didn't we, Stuart, who introduced us.
I haven't thanked him enough, to be honest. I will thank you more, Stuart.
Yeah, if you're out there.
So, there are other ways other than the mortgage to buy land.
Yep.
Are we going to dig deeper into those?
Yeah, I mean, we can. In other episodes, we'll go into great detail if you're watching or listening to this.
I think they're worth a very, very step-by-step conversation about all the options and.
So there's a whole host of different ways of attracting the capital, gaining the finance in order to do this. The mortgage rate is the simplest, and if you can, through your personal network, raise the deposit. Then of course you will be able to get a mortgage, and there are a number of organisations which we can mention in the future episodes, but that will lend. But again, the loan to value will be low, so generally you will have to raise quite a bit. Having said that, bear in mind that farmland is £10,000 to £12,000 an acre. An acre of land with planning permission for residential in an urban environment could be £1 million plus, or more. So there's a word called arbitrage. It basically means the difference in price between X and Y. It's a bit more complicated than that, but basically there's a massive difference in value if you can get that, and that value should accrue to you if you develop your smallholding.
And that's what was attractive to me as well, right? Because if we was going to get this land, going to have a mortgage, but if I went and bought another house, what can I do in that house that pays my mortgage?
Pretty much.
Rent out a room, Airbnb, have other people in my house.
In your house,
I want freedom. I don't want to be.
I didn't realise you felt that way about me when I came to stay.
You're not moving in. You don't want to see this in the morning, right? So this is why I love the Field to Farm and the Smallholding Revolution piece. We're acquiring a perceived low value piece of land. We have got a pathway to add value and planning gain on that agricultural piece of land. Plus, I'm an entrepreneur. You get a farm business that adds value to your life, feeds your family, makes you happy, makes you healthy,
serves the community,
and pays off that debt that we've created. Right. So why ain't more bonkers people doing it?
All right.
Right? So if I bought another house, I'd be working for another 40 years paying it off. If I buy a small piece of land,
you can live on it and it
live
pays
on
for
it,
you.
have wonderful times with my family, and create a business that pays for it. Sign me up, Buttercup.
All right. So I can find land, buy land, somehow find a way for the land to pay for itself, build my own house, grow whatever food that I want, whether that's animals or
fish
or vegetables,
cereal crops, grow excess to sell, to market. if you want to see, a lot of people think about money, they think of it as, you know, a £10 note, a £5 note. I've got lots of £5 notes. But if you look at it, I mean, all that is a note, a promise to pay. It says, if you read on it, I promise to pay the bearer the sum of, right? It's what's called a promissory note.
Yeah.
It represents the right to something. But if you went to the Bank of England and asked them to make good their promise, all they would say is, they'd just give you another promissory note.
Yeah.
It's a circular argument. In the old days, they would go and give you the equivalent amount of gold. That's what it was. It was a promise to give you gold. That note was a security that says, I've got this amount of gold stored in the bank. They don't do that anymore, right? So most people go, oh, I've got lots of money. But all money is the right. If you think of it as stored energy, it's a unit of energy. So you've put some energy into something, you've given it to someone else, or you've done something for someone else. They can't, you've got nothing to trade for with them at that time. So they give you a promissory note, which you can then share with someone else. Instead of going to the bank and trading it in for gold, which is what used to happen in the old days, you could then give that to a third party and say, here, you can have my note, you can go and trade it in for gold. And then that person trades it to someone else and gives it to them. So, because we all believe it's worth the gold that's in the bank.
Yeah.
Now there is no gold in the bank.
What?
But we still keep, yeah, that's right.
What?
It's fake.
What?
So we still keep passing around the notes, but one day someone's going to wake up and go, oh, this note's just a piece of paper, right? But the plants you plant, the trees you plant, the animals you grow, they're real. They're tangible. They're real things. You can eat those plants and vegetables. You can live and survive off them. You can't eat a £10 note.
Now it's polymer now, isn't it?
And polymer, yeah. And it's losing value at the rate of 10% a year, probably. So
Yeah.
you have a £10,000 in the bank. Next year, it's only worth £9,000.
Yeah.
Okay.
You know, and the year after, it's worth 8,200 and whatever the diminishing return of it is. Whereas you plant 10,000 garlic bulbs, next year you'll have 100,000 garlic bulbs.
Damn straight.
How about that for a return on your investment?
So, here's a kicker of a question.
Come on then.
Yeah.
Everybody knows, this is in the news all the time,
Yeah.
that the farming sector is
Yeah.
not doing very well. They're not
Right.
making very much money.
Yep.
Like,
Yeah.
why the heck would we
Yeah.
enter this?
Yeah, I had this.
In the current state of farming.
I had this row a few months ago, actually. I've just come up with a strapline. Go small, go local. Small holdings.
Sorry, so what was that question again? Because I don't think we got that. Your question.
Yeah. Why would we get into this?
Yeah, why we're going into farming
Yeah.
when we can see that the farming industry is struggling at the moment and suffering.
Right. Sorry, Scotty. Yeah.
Right, I think you handled this, the political piece, and then I'll provide the solution. Because small holdings are the answer to this mess.
Yeah. Okay. So farming is traditional. I say traditional. Modern farming methods are struggling. So since the Second World War, obviously there's not many people alive now who will remember it, but at the end of the Second World War in Europe in particular, there was quite a bit of starvation, particularly in Holland and places like that. In Britain, we got through it because the country was blockaded, so we couldn't get the imports. We still, prior to the Second World War, we imported a lot of food because America had opened up and South America, so it's cheaper to get the food from there. British farming was on a downer in the period from the First World War until the Second World War. So it only kicked up during the war because we had to feed our people. It was dig for victory was the phrase that some people may have heard of, to stop the population starving.
Yeah.
And apparently during the war, people were extremely healthy because they were out exercising and they were eating, homegrown food.
With nutrients in.
With nutrients directly from the soil. But after the Second World War, a lot of people returned. The country wanted to modernise. And two things happened. Farming, rightly so, the government thought, right, we don't want to be in that position again. We need to make sure farming is a strategic thing. We need to keep the food coming in. So they were focused and obsessed about productivity. And productivity was measured in yield. And you'll even hear it today. Yield, for most farmers, is still considered how much the food weighs. Now, if you think about it, that's quite strange because the weight of food is effectively how much gravity force is on your weight is a measure of the gravitational force on your mass of your body or the mass of this table or this whatever. It's how much gravity is forcing it's a representation of the gravitational impact on this item of mass. So the weight of food is not really a measure of the quality of the nutrient content, how good it's going to be for you, but it's a measure of how much water is there in it. Because if I dehydrate this, if I stick this in a big oven and take all the moisture out, I'm left with a bit of dust, right? Which weighs virtually nothing. But all the water is gone. Now it doesn't weigh anything. So really, the more water I can get in an item, in a crop of food, the heavier it is, the higher the yield, because look how much it weighs. And that was great at a time when food always had the nutrients in, going back thousands of years. They would measure it that way because you didn't need to worry about the nutrients.
Done its job.
Yeah. So what's
but now,
the issue with modern
farming?
The
issue with modern farming now is the soils have been depleted through overuse of pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, and fertilizers. And the reason that has happened is because after the war, if you want, I don't think I can say it on the video, but certain items that were used in the war quite a lot that resulted in things disintegrating when these things were dropped on them, those things used a main ingredient that's used in fertilizer. So when the war finished, there was no use for these things that made things disintegrate. So they thought, what can we do with it? It works as fertilizer. And so nitrogen fertilizer was thrown on the land and it increased the growth of food rapidly. Yeah. Now, that was fine, but when plants grow
at that time,
when plants grow quickly, and this is something that is relatively recently understood, plants share about 30, when a plant grows, it takes sunlight and it does a thing called photosynthesis. Most people learn that at school, whether they take
classic A-level biology.
Biology, right? Photosynthesis. So it takes the sunlight energy, takes in carbon dioxide, uses water, converts it into sugars, different types of sugars. But 35% of the sugars that a plant produces through photosynthesis, it shares with the soil microbiome. I mean, it could vary in different locations because the plant needs all sorts of micronutrients, but it can't get them from the soil on its own. It gets them from a relationship and an association with bacteria and fungi and archaea and all sorts of other organisms that live in the soil, many of which haven't even been identified today. But these organisms, bacteria can go down 400 meters into the Earth's rock. They can break through solid rock and granite. Bacteria have been found in granite. And so these fungal hyphae networks, basically, and the bacteria that they're associated with, effectively share and go into the plant roots and the rhizome area, which is the root area of the plant. And the plant thinks, I need some boron, I need some magnesium or manganese or whatever. And so it will send these sugars to attract the bacteria and attract the fungi to live in the root zone. And the fungi go, I need sugar. So they share, just like we do in a society, you know.
So there's a whole interconnected network.
Yeah.
So all of that. Avatar, when all the roots of all the plants were all talking.
That's it.
All of actually that. Based in.
That's true.
That's right.
That's true.
Okay.
Now,
so the business model is wrong within modern farming.
Okay. Because modern farming puts fertilizer on. Now, if the plant has all the nitrogen it needs for rapid growth, it goes, why am I sharing my sugars with all these bacteria? I might as well keep it all myself. And in fact, I want to grow really quickly because I've got the nitrogen that boosts my growth, kicks off my growth, so I need all that sugar for myself. So it grows even faster, but it doesn't share with the soil. So if I'm a little fungi.
Hi, fungi.
Why am I going to hang around here? I'm not getting fed. What am I going to do?
That's how the soil dies.
And that's
exactly.
So literally killing the soil.
That's right. So the business model is wrong.
Yeah.
The business practices are wrong.
Yeah.
Which results in foods that weigh a lot with no nutrients, which is keeping our communities unhealthy.
We've got more.
Which then puts more people in hospital, which puts more people in medicines, which pays more tax to the government, and that's why the government are propping up the farming industry.
Because
I was wondering, why is the government always giving bursaries and funding and grants?
They're propping it up.
Farmers?
And to the NHS.
And to the NHS. Yeah.
Every day, if you ever listen to BBC Radio 4, which I was brought up with, every single day they'll mention, the BBC, the NHS is in crisis. The NHS is in crisis. And I'm sure it is. But it's always in crisis. It's been in crisis all my life.
Yeah.
It's always been, and it always needs more money. And it always will need more money. Because we produce more food than ever the farmers are absolutely brilliant at doing their job and producing food. We produce more food than ever, and we've got the highest levels of chronic illness
That's
than
right.
ever.
Damn straight. It was a meme on Instagram, and it caught my eye, and it was like a bloke just thinking like this. He was going, "Why do they call the health food aisle health food? What does it make all of the other food?"
That's right.
So where we were talking about the lack of nutrients in our food nowadays, because we know the root structures kaput across big farming, and we're making strides towards that, but the lack of nutrients in our food has got to be addressed, and and I think more small holdings, going small, going local, growing nutrient-rich food to supply your local community is one part of the solution of the broken big farming industry.
I agree.
Yeah.
Okay.
So let's get more bonkers people doing it.
Let's do it.
So modern farming is broken because it's so big, uses artificial chemicals and fertilizer.
Wrong business models.
Wrong business models.
Yeah.
Exploitative, because even the farmers can't make money, real money.
Yeah.
And propped up by government funding.
Okay. Yeah, that's not how you grow a business if it's
If it relies on
government funding.
Yeah, the system is broken, isn't it? If it relies on government funding.
All right, so that now makes sense that small holding is the way to go because
it can help the answer.
Yeah.
It's not going to solve everything.
No.
Yeah.
But let's reverse the people that have all rushed into the cities, get all those people that want freedom and want to have healthy food and supply their community back out to the land and work small parcels of land that can be sived off of the big farming industry and feed good food to good people.
So small holding has lower overheads than modern big farming. The produce is better. Actually, you might know. Somebody told me that the produce that goes into supermarkets, even if it started off organic, still has pesticide sprayed on it.
Well, no. Organic systems can use certain pesticides and herbicides, but they have to be they have to be approved by the either Soil Association or for organic farmers and growers.
Yeah.
So it doesn't mean that they definitely have, because there are organic growers who don't use anything.
Okay.
But there are certain treatments that you can use, and I couldn't tell you what they are at the moment, but for another future podcast, I can get all that information. That would be very useful to. So some of it, just because it's organic, it doesn't mean to say it hasn't got pesticides on it, but they are ones that have been approved by Soil Association or organic farmers and growers.
So if I grow my own food, there is none of it in it. I'm guaranteed.
You can guarantee, but that's the only way you can guarantee, because you're right. The certification bodies can allow certain products that but might not agree with you.
Okay.
So you grow your own food. You know what's on it, and that's what you put on it. So you and your family have the opportunity to have pure, clean, unadulterated food if that's what you choose to do.
Sounds disgusting.
It's lovely, I can tell you. But I mean, you should have the right to eat pure, unadulterated food. But interesting enough, just while we're on that point, we haven't really talked much about animals. But I don't think it's come into place yet. But I think it's coming into place in September. I heard that the government are now going to insist that anyone with a chicken, and you've got chickens, has to register every chicken, even if you've got one chicken.
Something like that.
So at the moment, I think it's 50,000.
It's meant to be. There's a threshold of chickens that you can have, because I looked at chicken farming as well. There's a certain threshold that once you go past, you have to register every chicken.
Yeah, I think they're bringing it down to one, which is absurd, isn't it? I mean, there's birds flying in and out.
If I have a pet?
Yeah, I know.
Not produce chicken.
What a cluck they thinking of?
Allegedly, it's because of bird flu, but I'm like, what, are they going to register every pigeon and sparrow and robin and
because they're counting the bird flu.
They're all over the place, chickens. Aren't they?
Yeah.
It's a bit odd. And I think, if you think about it, it's bureaucrats who've never, ever farmed.
No, of course not.
Telling the people who have farmed or run their small holdings what to do, as is always the case.
Just like the people who decide how much money people should get on benefits have never been on benefits. So, it's that whole mess. Yeah. But I think we've reached a good point to end this episode. It's been fantastic so far. Oh. So we found out that you can buy land.
Yep.
There are more than just the typical mortgage way to buy land.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And once I've bought the land, there is a way to get planning permission for me to build on it.
Yeah. But we haven't gone into detail on that.
We haven't. I think let's go into that on the next episode. Yeah. And I can live on the land and grow my own produce, and the land will typically pay for itself if I start a farming business.
Yeah.
Damn straight. You get a free house in the country.
And you're healthy.
Yes.
Say what?
You and your family can live healthy lives.
Fantastic.
Viva la revolution.
Viva la revolution. Thank you so much for joining us. We shall see you on the next episode, where we will get deeper and deeper into all of the topics surrounding buying your own land, building your own farm, setting up a farm business in whatever shape or size, and having the land pay for itself while you build your entire life and your freedom. We shall see you on the next one. This has been the Smallholding Revolution podcast. Fantastic. You take care.
Viva la revolution.
Love that.